The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Should we do it anyway? Should we see?
We'll just knock it out. We'll just carry on. Just carry on with our lives.
We'll just bash it out now. Edit it down to a tight 5 to 8 minutes.
Can you? Can you? When we put this one out, can you play it on 1.2 speed or something, just to make it sound a bit more?
Yeah, I'll see what I can do.
Make us feel a little bit more alive.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. But we've got to speak particularly deeply so that it doesn't affect the authoritative tone and register of our voices. Okay. Mm-hmm.
No mai haere mai, kei te whakaronga mai, koe ki Gone by Lunchtime, the puff daddy of the podcasting Oscars. Today we're talking about ACT and co-governance, about the unexpected exit of Louisa Wall, about the Solomons and China. But first, Annabelle Lee Mather, Ben Thomas, we'll talk about the no longer so novel coronavirus. We'll say thank you very much to Te Ahi Butler for making this work. Actually, I should say, a friend of mine who was on another of the spin-offs, empire of podcasts, The Fold, good podcast about the media.
Never heard it.
With Duncan Creeves. Good.
Yeah.
You should have a listen. Not as good as
Such
this.
a grazer, Ben.
Anyway, she said to me that she really enjoyed doing the podcast, which seemed nice. And then she said, because she got to talk to Te Ahi Butler, and then she went on to say, who is my favourite thing about Gone by Lunchtime.
Oh.
Which is very nice about I hear, and deservedly so.
It's grateful to I hear.
But I think it's less of praise for me than it is a diss against yourself and Duncan.
And Duncan, and Annabelle, and Ben.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of notable. I saw we got a lot of good feedback for that Simon Bridges episode, the last one we did.
Right.
And apparently it was people's favourite one since the one we did with Chloe Swarbrick.
We've only done 2.
Yeah, and apparently the ones...
They like it when...
They like it when there's less of us.
A bit of diluted Ben.
It's kind of like when people tell me that I look really good in hats.
Right.
And I'm like,
and a mask.
Yeah.
Have you tried a motorcycle helmet?
Te Ahi was doing a gig the other day and they recognised them from Gone by Lunchtime.
The audio engineer recognised me and said that he listens to Gone by Lunchtime. Right. Shout out to Jordan from Native Audio.
And he also said that Te Ahi was his favourite thing about Gone by Lunchtime.
He might have said that.
Yeah, but this is like the audio engineering community. He's like I listen for the production. I listen for the crisp editing. It's like a techie one. He's like, I put in my gold-plated aux cable with my $800 headphones, and I just enjoy the ambience.
I mean, should we just leave you to it, Te Ahi? We'll go and grab a cup of tea.
Okay, I'm putting the stop clock on. I'm putting the stop clock on.
Annabelle's got places to go. Listen, thanks to spin-off members, the greatest of all the people in this blue dot of a planet. Thank you very much for keeping us going. It's 2 years since we went into lockdown, and it seemed like about the 100th, 200th sort of big podium speech that Jacinda Ardern had to give. And this time it was trying to kind of, not finish it, maybe sort of the beginning of the end of it, the announcement that capacity limits will go up to 200, that it was as of this weekend coming up. We're talking today, I should say, we're talking today on Wednesday, 30th of March. As of, I think it's April 4th, 5th. Anyway, next week, goodbye vaccine passes. You don't need to use them anymore. Goodbye QR codes. mandates.
Welcome our unvaccinated brethren.
Yes.
See you at the cafe.
Yes. Vaccine mandates mostly gone, save for, I think, healthcare, corrections, border workers, rest homes. So, we're it's getting there. And yet, yesterday, Ben, there were, I think it was 34 people dying with COVID. There were
like a higher death rate per capita than the US.
Right, yeah. And you look at our numbers going up, 850 people in hospital, 17,000 cases a day, roughly. And it's still very much with us.
It's never been with us more. It's really, really, really with us.
It is always in our hearts, potentially spreading to our lungs and our brains.
I'm not sure that's necessarily physiologically accurate, but yes.
Yeah, there is this interesting sort of kind of rhetorical, not trick, but pose, which is like, well, once we've hit the peak, then we can start reeling back the restrictions. It's like, I'm no mathematical genius, but I've seen these graphs, right? And I'm pretty sure the peak means we're halfway. It's
right.
If we're talking about a normal distribution, which we're not really, because on the left-hand side of the graph, there is a period where there's no coronavirus, whereas on the right-hand side, there's just an endless tail of coronavirus.
Yes,
as far as
and
we
it
can tell.
plateaus out as you look at the numbers in Australia and so on, which are going up again, and it doesn't go back down to the ocean.
Well, I'm not like a mathematical genius like Ben, but I am really good at Wordle, and what I know is that it's far from over, and what makes it kind of worse for us at the moment is that we're heading into winter, which is when we know the virus really ramps up. So we're only halfway up the crest of the wave, about to body slam down the other side and then get dunked, and we'll probably have less protections than ever before heading into winter.
But I mean,
the winter of discontent and snotty hankies.
I mean, the thinking is, that everyone who's not infected yet will get infected before winter. They'll then have their 3 months of basically antibody immunity. It sort of tides us through. It's really been interesting looking at the government's changed rhetoric. Where you actually look at the ads which say, "Oh, now it's safer to remove some restrictions." And I assume that the argument there is that there is a level of sort of that vaunted herd immunity from people who've gotten the virus. Got high levels of boosting, and in Auckland in particular, numbers are actually coming down quite a lot. So your chances of getting the virus are less. But we've seen, the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister at least, the COVID Response Minister, in interviews saying, going out for coffee or a drink or something, that's safe. Which not technically true in the epidemiological sense that a professional epidemiologist like me would say. But this idea that, we do have to recede, and there's a lot of talk of living with the virus. And I thought the Prime Minister's speech was really interesting on those lines, because it was specifically done on the day, 2 years to the day since the first hard lockdown was called. It was written very much as a sort of George Bush on the aircraft carrier mission accomplished kind of speech. We're opening up, look at all the hard work we've done, look at what we've been through. There were these really scripted, made for TV and headlines lines like, we're bloody tired, we're...
to be fair, George Bush was sort of 10 minutes into an invasion of Iraq versus 2 years into a pandemic.
No, sure. But what I mean is, it was staged as, and the speech was written as a sort of, we can be proud of what we've done. Now we're on to the next phase. We're opening up, look, let's, pat on the back sort of thing. But the delivery didn't match that at all. I thought it was the flattest and least energetic I've ever seen Ardern give a major address. She was sort of hurrying through, almost like, fire safety instructions at a town hall meeting or something. And I think that sort of betrayed the fact that the government is just desperate to sort of shuffle on from COVID-19 and say, this is now just business as usual. This is just the world we live in. Don't come to us with your problems.
I really felt like it was more like reflective vibes than trying to hurry through it per se, and an opportunity to remind people of the stuff that she hadn't agreed with and then had to do, like mandates and all of that stuff. And, you know, a bit of a history lesson about what happened. Just in terms of the whole living with COVID thing, I think what's going to be really interesting going forward is living with long COVID and how well equipped New Zealand is to do that. Like, how's ACC going to be dealing with long COVID? Like, if you get COVID at work, like you're an air hostess or a waitress or whatever, like how many is ACC like geared up to start processing long hauler COVID claims and stuff? That's going to be the real interesting thing, because it's easy to say it's time to live with COVID, but we're not thinking about like how well prepared is the system in terms of like additional sick leave, support, resourcing, all of that sort of stuff when it comes to living with what can be the devastating effects of long COVID. And I feel like that's not a conversation that we're really having enough.
Well, if we approach it with the same level of zeal and efficacy as we approach living with long rheumatic fever or long asthma, or then I think we can look forward to a sunny future.
One of the sort of challenges, I suppose, that the Prime Minister faced in delivering that speech last week was not wanting to give the impression that this was in some way the result of the occupation, riot, convoy, call it what you will, which I have no reason to doubt. And there are others who think maybe it was more to do with the poll, but, you know, she was very clear that it was to do with the timing, which had always been set out, that once we were down what you both so adeptly mathematically described as the downward part of the mountain, that we would be going towards that. And it's interesting to see that in light of basically the end of the mandates. Yes, it's not completely the end of the mandates, but most of them, and signalling the end of the mandates. The many thousands of people who gathered to protest calling for the end of the mandates are now promising to gather at the end of this week to protest, I'm not sure exactly what, and if reading their comms, neither entirely are they. But if we thought, and I'm not suggesting that anyone really did, that this change would mean the end of that movement, we're very wrong.
People just like doing activities.
Oh, yeah. It's a bit of extracurricular days out.
They're lonely people that have found a brotherhood and now they just want to vibe it out together.
No doubt. There's some solidarity in that group, and maybe that's a natural human thing. It is. I mean, I've probably spent too much time reading these exchanges than is healthy for a human being. But
maybe they'll go back to like worrying about chemtrails, and maybe they'll start like protesting against Christopher Luxon and like questioning what was in the chemtrails that Air New Zealand was spraying all over the country when he was the CEO. Like, who knows what fabulously ridiculous conspiracy theory will become the next
coalition of viewpoints.
I think the ironclad rule with it is because the new Clark Gayford rumours have sort of cropped up, and judging on the sort of history of this, basically anything that you say as a joke to parody their views now will be what they believe is a firm article of faith in 2 years' time.
Yeah.
So that's the exponential curve as well, isn't it? Look, let's talk about ACT, David Seymour, co-governance. David Seymour kind of cracked open the cap on that particular subject, calling for a referendum on the issue and saying that would be a bottom line for any government negotiations after the next election. That in turn prompted accusations of race baiting. There were calls even from Māori Party and Matthew Tukaki for boycotts of funders of the ACT Party. Annabelle, you had David Seymour on your television program, The Hui, this week. Mihinganagi Forbes interviewed him. What did we learn from that?
I think what we learnt from that is that David would rather spend millions and millions of dollars forking out on treaty settlements for treaty breaches going forward than trying to create a system that might help to avoid treaty breaches in the first place, which is essentially what co-governance would ultimately aim to do, as well as provide plurality of voice and, a rethink of values. Like, for example, if you look at places where there are co-governance, like Te Aroa River settlement, lakes, Waikato, those sorts of places, we see that when you have co-governance with Māori, that you see a shift in some of the values. So you see things like conservation and sustainability coming to the fore, which is ultimately a good thing. And far from Māori being like sticks in the mud that get in the way of like farmers and stuff, because Māori, through the treaty settlement process, actually have real deep interest in agriculture and stuff. They sort of create models that are good for business and good for kaitiakitanga. So I guess really it's just playing into a deep-seated fear that a lot of Pākehā have about what power sharing with Māori might look like. But actually, it's kind of like the marriage equality bill, like everyone that was super anti-marriage equality because they thought somehow it diminishes the mana of their own marriage somehow. And actually, however many years later, we know that it hasn't, and it's actually a good thing.
Interesting. It was an interesting interview, I thought, and we've seen ACT leaders in the past in interviews, including I think one where Jamie White didn't know what whānau order was. Was that your program?
That was Native Affairs. He didn't know what whānau order was. Here's the other thing about co-governance, so just in terms of whānau order, is that things like whānau order, they're kind of like, and treaty settlements, they're like bottom of the cliff stuff. Like Māori don't want to spend all their time having to go to court to fight over treaty breaches. Like a lot of the discussion around this is around three waters. But if you want to look at a real example of what's happening with water in Aotearoa, you look at what happened in the Hawke's Bay. There's an iwi down there whose river has completely dried up. It is literally bone dry. This is a river that they swam in, ate out of, bathed in, all of that. And the farmer up the road has been allowed to dam the river and give it to all of his mates that grow grapes and stuff, while the Māori down the road, before it finally got reticulated years later, would spend weeks over summer not being able to drink water, flush their toilets, all of that stuff, and their river's gone. So if you had a bit of co-governance, and I'm not saying Three Rivers is perfect at all, but like when you have a plurality of voice, when you have different people at the table, just like when you have things like more women on boards, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what gets discussed in terms of like the history of co-governance happened when I was working for Finlayson in Parliament. Because a lot of it developed as these kind of bespoke arrangements and treaty settlements, usually over natural resources. Like,
in one sense, you really are
the father,
the king of co-governance, aren't you? You are the co-governor. Sorry, it's an important point. It's a point to make.
And Seymour actually made this distinction in his speech. I actually hurriedly read Seymour's speech because I think somebody wanted to get me on the radio to talk about it last week, and And it was actually, the speech was actually really interesting compared to how it was reported. Like, I mean, obviously it was reported exactly as ACT wanted it reported, right, which was a referendum on co-governance. What they were actually suggesting was basically a reheated version of this referendum/legislation that both ACT and New Zealand First have promoted at different times, basically removing the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi from New Zealand legislation. Seymour's proposed bill is a little different, where he just sort of talks about redefining what the principles are and saying the principles are that everyone's equal and nobody gets treated any differently. But it has the same effect. So it's not actually about co-governance in particular. It's actually just about removing the treaty from New Zealand law. Again, like I think there's actually a lot of conceptual sort of fuzziness on what co-governance is, and this is part of the problem that the government has had, when this he pua sort of shadow boxing came up, is that co-governance, it doesn't, if you'd say something as a co-governance arrangement, that doesn't actually necessarily tell you much about how it works. There's all sorts of, there's myriad different ways of doing it over sort of, natural resources. Annabelle's right. Like when you're talking about it sort of in a policy sense, there was this buzzword a while ago in Wellington called co-design, which was that you'd bring in the treaty partner to help actually design the policy with you rather than just sort of doing consultation. And part of the reason that you do that is because consultation can go on forever. You don't know if you've got the right people. Whereas if you're co-designing it, you say, well, in a way, you're actually outsourcing the consultation. You say, well, the treaty partner will do the consultation in amongst itself. Then they'll talk to us and we'll get a better outcome for, what are pressing social economic policy issues, which is that Māori are at the bottom of the heap in pretty much every social indicator in New Zealand, and we do need to find a way to fix it. There's a few ways of doing it. One of them is devolution, which is not really co-governance. That's that sort of whānau model where you just give money to people to do things. And, an actor actually...
To fix problems that the system has created by being institutionally racist, like in health and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the sort of evolution of that was that, a lot of iwi providers, a lot of Māori groups sort of were like, well, we're kind of being treated like just contractors. The government has created these problems or has allowed these problems to flourish as a result of treaty breaches historically. And then we're basically getting a contract with KPIs to fix it. But actually, a lot of these KPIs are wrong. A lot of the box ticking is wrong. This isn't the right way to approach it. The framework's too rigid. How about we get involved in the policy design? And so then you have more consultation at a policy level, and then co-governance, as it's talked about in, some of these areas, is sort of saying, well, actually, why don't we just, it's from the start, let's just involve the treaty partner so that we don't have to go through all of this rigmarole on every single policy, and from a pragmatic point of view, it makes a lot of sense. And look, you should always examine it in the context of each individual instance, to see if that's the right solution. But, this sort of blanket talk of co-governance as some sort of constitutional affront doesn't make any sense. I mean, so some of the terms are so unclear as to be meaningless. They talk about the proposed Māori Health Authority. That's not co-governance. That's two government departments. Te Puni Kōkiri is a Māori-centric, sort of Māori issues-focused government department. It doesn't mean it's co-governance, the fact that it exists. It's a Crown agency with a chief executive who's responsible to the Public Service Commission and has delivered...
The new Health NZ and the Māori Health Authority is an example of co-governance.
No, absolutely not.
They're two separate things.
Māori Health Authority... So Health New Zealand is going to be a Crown agency which will run all of the health services and policy. And then the Māori Health Authority will also be a Crown agency with a board appointed by ministers, and they will.
But doesn't that sit within a co-governance under a co-governance principle?
No. Okay, co-governance principle would be. So you've got co-governance talks about basically the treaty partnership, right? You have the Crown and you have Māori. Now there are Māori within the Crown.
Hapu and iwi.
Yeah, so there are Māori within the Crown. Kelvin Davis is a Māori person who is also a Crown minister. But when he's acting as Crown Māori Relations Minister, he's not the treaty partner, he's the Crown. And so co-governance would be, you would have a board and half of them would be appointed by iwi, and the Crown wouldn't have any involvement in that. These 6 people would just turn up and say, we were appointed by our people. And then they would have, what's been called a veto over, Health New Zealand strategy and planning. But the proposed model here is just 2 government departments and both the CEs need to sign off a plan. Now that happens in other areas around government. You need 2 CEs to sign something off. It's not co-governance at all.
I think when you think about co-governance, if we're going to have the big debate about co-governance, we need to think about what the alternatives are to co-governance, because the Waitangi Tribunal has already found that Māori never ceded sovereignty, that we have that came out of the Ngāpuhi hearings, that Māori didn't wake up one day and decide that they were tired of running their own country and could someone come along and do it for us. So that didn't happen. They maintained their sovereignty, their tino rangatiratanga and their mana motuhake. So if you think of it from that respect, then perhaps the solution would be that you have a separate Māori parliament. I imagine that most New Zealanders aren't really down with a separate Māori parliament, and therefore co-governance is actually quite a good elegant solution to that question, although I'm sure most Māori would probably prefer their own Māori parliament. So I think if we have the debate about co-governance, we should really be looking at what all of the alternatives are to that.
And Kelvin Davis has acknowledged that debate hasn't, or that conversation hasn't really happened sufficiently, and that there's going to be consultation, whatever form that takes, in the months to come. And Willie Jackson is preparing the next step in the Purpura, which itself came out of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which was signed by National, and so on. And that this is going to lead right into next year's election, presumably. Are we up for that? Are we ready for that? I mean, it's such a difficult one,
I just think
right?
it's real hard when you get politicians talking about this stuff, because it just gets like hijacked and used as a a way of like fear mongering and all of that sort of stuff. So I kind of feel like politicians aren't even really the ones that are qualified to be leading that debate. It should be our leading like constitutional lawyers and
Jeffrey
those
Palmer,
kind of guys.
Yeah, no.
And iwi, obviously.
No,
and
we need to keep public law academics as far away from this as possible. We've had, the key government actually as part of an agreement with the Māori Party had a constitutional conversation. And it went on for a few years, and they released a report which just had more stuff to think about. And their conclusion in the end was, say love it, what will be, que sera, whatever. And I feel like this will go the same kind of way. I don't think that the New Zealand political system, which is Westminster system, which is incrementalist by nature, is set up to have, a discussion about big overarching constitutional framework change. I don't think that's what people want. That's what the electorate has. That was actually the one big change we've had was MMP, and that was actually the public saying we don't want any more big wrenching change. We want things to be done incrementally and slowly. I think you're right in the sense that you can't have these adult discussions about big picture stuff. And I think in a way that's fair, because people can't really imagine what it would look like if it's too different from now. Instead, I think, the way that these things happen, not just in terms of treaty stuff, but just wider sort of discussions about the role of local government, about, all sorts of things that, very, very loosely get grouped together as constitutional New Zealand stuff. It happens incrementally. It happens case by case. Everything gets debated on its merits. And, what you find is that over time, things tend a certain way if they work. And, and I think that's probably the way that this will go. And I think that's probably a good thing.
This is Gone by Lunchtime. We'll be back in a hot minute. I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Let's talk about Louisa Wall. We had Simon Bridges suddenly announce his departure a couple of weeks ago, and we had Louisa Wall suddenly announce her departure this week on Tuesday, which is, according to my calculations, yesterday, it being Wednesday today. That was a surprise, wasn't it? There's a lot of backstory there. There's a lot of scuttlebutt around that you've heard, most of which I don't think is true, but it was mentioned in the release, which was issued from the Prime Minister's office. Not by the Labour president, not by Louisa Wall herself, but by the Prime Minister's office. Said at the bottom, Louisa Wall will not be offering any more comments, you'll be issuing a valedictory speech on April 14th.
there might be a few white knuckles.
You sort of just like to have been in the meeting where the text of that particular release was agreed, you know. But of course, Annabelle, like an incredible record, like the achievements that few politicians can boast over the course of a career, where the marriage equality is the most famous of those, the private members bill she pushed through. There's also the safe spaces outside abortion clinics. There was making revenge porn illegal. It's pretty incredible CV there. There was the episode which was touched on in that release in the 2020 election candidate selection, where she was basically, I don't think it's putting it too strongly to say she was muscled out of her candidacy in the Manurewa
crowbarred
out. And then
chiseled off.
Lawyers were involved. And this is the stuff which you hear different versions of this story depending on who you talk to. But we know that lawyers were involved, that there were threats of court action, and that she then was offered a high place on the list. And Arena Williams got that candidate spot. Oh, what's going on? Tell me everything, Annabelle. You've got your ear to the ground.
Honestly, I just can't help but think that when it comes to Louisa, like you know, we hear a lot about she's not a team player. Yeah. It's like, well, has the team actually been playing with her? Because she actually seems like a pretty phenomenal team player in terms of like maximum impact.
Yes.
It's terrible.
And represented a country.
Kia ora.
In sport.
Double international.
Double cap. It's terrible the way she's been treated, and she'll be remembered as one of our most effective MPs, I think, and one of our greatest Māori MPs, and certainly of my generation. I think, but not only effective in terms of being a legislator, if that's the right term, but also like just a really principled person, like her stance on West Papua, on the Uyghurs, all of that stuff. Yep. She is amazingly principled, fearless MP who spoke out on those really important issues, even when her party wouldn't. Like, what a wahine. And she plays in a band with Shane Reti.
And I think that's the tension, isn't it? That, you know, she will always do the right thing, even if it's not popular. The euphemism is, she's not a team player, and, you know, there's all sorts of ideas about what that might stand in for. But then as far as the public is concerned, the things that she hasn't been a team player on, you know, she had a private members bill when Labour was languishing in opposition for marriage equality. She was encouraged by the leadership of the Labour Party to withdraw that bill because they didn't want to concentrate on what they saw as culture wars or something potentially divisive within their own communities. They wanted to focus on the economy or whatever. And she said, no, we're carrying it forward. The Prime Minister came out in support of it. You know, her party obviously fell in behind because it's what they believe in, even if they found it inconvenient. And that passed. So as far as the public is concerned, you'd say, well, how is not being a team player in that?
And then, by the way,
it's such a damaging narrative, and it always gets wheeled out like, oh, they're not a team player, or oh, they're difficult to work with in the office. You see it like rolled out again and again. But here's the thing: National love working with her. They're mihiing to her. The Greens are. Actually, she was able to play with every team on the paddock, except it seems her own. So it seems like it says a lot more about Labour than her. I mean, could you not have just made her the Minister for Sports? The woman's a double cap. Like, at the very least, like how politicised can that be? Like, the way they've treated her, I think, is
it is
incredibly disappointing.
When you look at the intake for Cabinet in 2017 and then 2020, the idea that Louisa Wall would be sort of missing from that broader lineup of, 25, 26 people once you include outside of Cabinet. If you sort of thought that Louisa Wall, who was one of the only people who had been in Parliament for almost a decade, when they were elected, it's one of the only people who had ever passed a bill. They went in with two people who had been in Cabinet.
And she had plenty of parliamentary experience too. So, on paper, She was like
absolute
shoo-in for a cabinet seat.
Plus, you know,
but I suppose
without in any way diminishing her personal achievements, also a Māori woman, queer, ticks a lot of boxes that Labour does, you know, is very conscious about ticking, and still didn't make
Committed
it in.
to
But
her
somebody
electorate.
made an assessment, rightly or wrongly, I do not know, that while lots of people, when you bring them into that room, they then, you know, there's collective responsibility. And so then a different kind of discipline follows. Somebody made the assessment that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, I think too, we shouldn't underestimate how toxic professional jealousy can be.
I mean, the main thing is, like, in terms of, because I got asked, you know, I think on radio or something, what's Simon Bridges' legacy? And the thing is, I think we can all agree, Simon Bridges, remarkable sort of personal reinvention, you know, very amiable, sort of affable public figure now, you know, was certainly a very capable politician. He was a pretty solid leader of the opposition. He was a good mid-range minister, but not really any kind of legacy to speak of. And that's the case with most of the people who pass through Parliament's doors. And the fact that Louisa Wall has, you know, she has a real legacy, you know, even leaving aside marriage equality, which you wouldn't, because that would be the first thing you would think of. You know, she has a tangible legacy as a legislator in the New Zealand Parliament, and no one's ever going to be able to take that away from her.
It does, when you think about it, sound a bit like an entire building collapsing when you lose both the wall and the bridges.
Great news for me, though. I'm just like writing up the new list of episodes for the next series of Matangi Rea, like Cyber,
It's kind of suspicious that they keep on rolling up. And they both report having got kind of these strange, gravelly voiced phone calls in the deep of night. I know, we're the skeletons. Let's talk about the Solomon Islands. China, we touched on with Louisa Wall, and I mean, this is an interesting area where she was outspoken. You mentioned on the Uyghurs. There was a leaked draft defence strategy from the Solomon Islands that emerged this week, which talked about this pact between China and the Solomon Islands, which would see potentially a whole lot of Chinese military hardware stacked up just a few thousand miles from Australia. And it feeds into a kind of wider power struggle in the Pacific. We remember, of course, the Pacific reset when the US announced that they were going to focus more on the region. China has been getting more involved in a range of different ways, economically and strategically, within the Pacific. The Solomons in 2019, I think, did that switch of recognizing mainland China instead of Taiwan.
I was in Taiwan for a business junket a while ago.
Oh, yeah.
Ages ago, like 2006 maybe. And we visited,
we
visited like the embassy district.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's basically just this building, and you go in and sort of in the reception area where it says, you know, which floor, you know, has the business name in those buildings. It's just got the name of every country with fewer than 1,000 inhabitants in it, like in the entire world, and they're all just in this building, like,
and
it's
just
Togo,
one Murray
United
who
Nations
represents
and Micronesia, like, and they're like, this is here are the diplomats, and because, you know, there was at that point before China was really sort of ascendant regionally, and there still is a little bit, you know, this real jostling for diplomatic recognition as Taiwan sort of tried to sort of solidify its kind of, you know, a secure place in the international order, and you know, it started off with a sort of jostling and kind of bidding war between these two countries, but now, of course, China is a world superpower, you know, quite distinct from back then.
The Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare Annabelle said that criticism of the deal was insulting and was quoted as saying, "When a helpless mouse is cornered by vicious cats, it will do anything to survive." There is a sense in which, as far as the Solomon's concerned, Ben mentioned a bidding war. If you don't want to have Chinese piling up on your doorstep, Australia and America, their pals, and New Zealand, to the west, bid higher.
Exactly. I don't know if you guys heard, but Kevin Rudd did a really interesting interview with
Kim
With
Hill.
Kim Hill
Wow, that
on
was
the
amazing.
weekend.
The end bit was pretty. Did you hear that?
Oh my God, it was so awkward. Why does that always happen?
He delivered the whole interview. He spoke in sentences as if addressing a lecture theatre of 5,000 eager students. In response to every question, he spoke with a monotone, robotic. It was just like that. And then at the end, she goes, "Is it true that the ALP rejected your request to stand in a federal seat?" And he said, "It is not for me to say whether," and it went on like that. It was one of those great, it wasn't quite, it was a bit like Kim Hill John Pidge, but it was just incredible listening, where he answered a different question about 5 or 6 times, told her off for you to harangue me when, it's like, how dare you speak to someone? Didn't you know I'm a former Prime Minister of Australia and I lead a very important think tank here in New York? Sorry, Annabelle, you're saying.
No. It was he thinks he sounded like a lecturer. I actually found it fascinating, but it actually...
I found the entire lecture fascinating.
But he reiterated stuff that we've already talked about on here, which is that in the Pacific, Australia and New Zealand, and particularly Australia, have really dropped the ball as being, I guess, sort of senior regional partners to our Pacific neighbours. And so in the absence of them being good Pacific partners, China, as the superpowers of the world move their chess pieces across the board, like we're seeing in, the Ukraine with Russia, US, all of that sort of stuff. So now China's moving down here and they're being much better regional partners. And it's not about who has the deepest pockets, although Australia has cut back hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in aid. It's stuff that's as simple as, for the Pacific, security is actually having your island not be underwater in 10 years' time. And both Australia and New Zealand just aren't taking those concerns about climate change seriously enough, and particularly Australia, who kind of rails against any kind of change, even though they're a significant contributor to global warming. And so, if we're to look at how New Zealand has reacted to Ukraine and supporting their sovereignty to be able to make security decisions for themselves, we really have no moral high ground to stand on in terms of the deal that the Solomons has made with China. We absolutely should not be surprised by it, though, because the Chinese influence in the region has been happening for a long time. And as you would expect, as the US starts to encircle the Pacific as well. The sad thing is that Melanesians, Micronesians and Polynesians are getting wedged between two superpowers. And who knows what that's going to mean in a few years' time.
One of the things that is clear, Penny Hennedy was quite strong on this subject rather than shying away from it. And I expect that in this budget upcoming, which we'll talk about more on this podcast in the weeks to come, there will be quite sizable increase in defence spending. I mean, we've seen in recent days, New Zealand has contributed, I think, 3 pairs of gumboots and a bread maker to the Ukrainian resistance to Russia's invasion. But it is our defence spending is limited, and if we want to, particularly in the Pacific, establish something that can provide a serious contribution to those issues that you talk about, Annabelle, then we're probably going to have to up it.
Yeah, and there's the ongoing question of, how much do we contribute to our alliance with Australia, our only ally. They've often seen us as sort of shirkers, and they themselves are sort of, only sort of buying into a Christmas club scheme with the United States. Australia doesn't have the means to defend itself against any serious, power.
Isn't it getting some submarines, though?
In about 17 years, yeah. if the Chinese could just wait.
Screwed the French. And
just wait.
Not yet.
We will continue our game of Battleship Down in 17 years later.
It's kind of like how the Ukraine and Russia were like having diplomatic talks, and while they were going on, like 150,000 troops were sort of massing on the border, you know. We are seen as sort of not pulling our weight, and you know, similar discussions, you know, are taking place in Europe about, you know, whether people are, you know, pulling their weight in NATO, you know, and putting in, because, you know, it's been very easy in the last, you know, few decades to sort of think, well, these are kind of abstract concerns, and if there's one thing that you know, the invasion of Ukraine has shown, it's that, you know, we still live in the world that has existed for a long time, which is one where, you know, conflict between states is not unavoidable. Or sorry, no, it's not. Oh shit! I sound like in the loop.
That's what Kevin
conflict is not neither foreseeable nor no. What I mean is, you know, like conflict is not consigned to the dustbin of history, right?
Change with continuity.
Yeah.
There's also the
and look, and remember, you know, our concerns in the Pacific. You know, we have the world's largest exclusive economic zone. China, you know, one of the particular things identified by the white paper by our Defence Force was, you know, food security supplies for unnamed powers that had values that were not consonant with the West's. You know, and in terms of, you know, even patrolling our fishing areas, you know, these are the sorts of things where, you know, and as you see overseas, you know, we have international law, but it's not, you know, international law isn't the same as going to the disputes tribunal and getting a ruling, right? You know, there's a lot of brinksmanship, there's a lot of, you know, nudging right up to the point, you know, at which point sometimes, you know, things will then become, you know, kind of get the momentum of their own. And so, you know, if we want to defend our interests, you know, in as broad a sense as that means, you know, we do need to get more serious about defence.
I think too, one of the things is that we've kind of got short memories and an overdeveloped sense of security. Like, oh, we're way down here at the bottom of the world. No one cares. We're not important. But like the Pacific Theatre in World War II was literally drenched in blood. And in the Solomons, it's literally like a graveyard of warships and fighter planes and all of that sort of stuff. So you can understand why it's, for those who don't have short memories, when they see these superpowers taking all of these super aggressive poses against each other, why you would feel like you need a little bit of total. You might need to like shore yourself up.
And if we need to repeat New Zealand's greatest military victory, the conquest of German Samoa in 1914.
Before we
digress too far into the harbour, changed the flag. And
thank you very much, Fiahi. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, listeners.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.